Good morning. My name is Dave Dulio. I'm a professor in the political science department here at Oakland University. I also have the pleasure of serving as the director of our Center for Civic Engagement. One of the goals at the center is to be a convener of conversations about issues of public importance, and we certainly have an issue of public importance on the agenda today. The future of education in Michigan is something that everyone cares about. It's an issue that can be as vexing as it is important. It's like an onion. We peel back different layers and we discover even more questions maybe than we answer. As we'll get into in a moment, there are some troubling trends, but there may be room for optimism. We'll start to explore these dynamics in just a moment. This issue is also one that is sure to be a focus of the 2026 election cycle, so we're convening this discussion at just the right time. With the governor's race being an open seat along with all of the state house and all of the state senate up for grabs, we're going to have quite the campaign season here in Michigan. And this issue is likely to be front and center in many of those contests. A thread that runs through all of the work that we do here at the center is civil discourse. We want to be a place where people can come to engage in conversations about critical issues. But when we have these conversations, we want them to be respectful. We want them to be deliberative. We want them to be productive. That's why we also start all of our programs at the center by reminding everyone of our tenets of civic engagement and productive dialogue. Nothing controversial, just reminders about how we expect things to go. So when we do these things, we want to engage in respectful dialogue, employ honest listening, model civil behavior and tone, support free and open discourse, consider viewpoints other than our own, and find opportunities to agree, not just disagree. This morning, we have a unique opportunity. We'll start by hearing from two journalists who have done some very interesting reporting on the state of education in Michigan. Isabel Lohman and Mike Wilkinson from Bridge are here to talk about what they have found. Then we'll have a panel of experts from a number of different perspectives to react to what we hear from Isabel and Mike. That's another mainstay of the work that we do at the center, bringing different perspectives and viewpoints to bear on issues that we confront. Hearing from different perspectives allows us to challenge our own assumptions and get a better understanding of the issue overall. The Dean of our School of Education and Human Services, John Marjoram Lays, will lead that panel discussion with our expert guests. Right before I bring up Isabel and Mike, let me say again, welcome to those who are here and more importantly, frankly, sorry everybody, to those who are streaming via the Detroit PBS Facebook page. We are delighted to have you virtually here on campus and glad you could join us this morning. So without further ado, let's bring up Isabel and Mike and get into this thing. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Of course.
Bridge has done some fascinating reporting over the last several months. What has it been, 6 or 8 months that you guys have been churning out stories about education in Michigan. And in fact, it continued just last Friday. There was a fascinating piece on your website. Now, with all of that out there, right, or given all that you've sort of covered, what do you think is the most significant finding in that set of reporting that you've done?
Yeah, so we've tackled everything from absenteeism to attendance concerns to what do we do about the teacher workforce. And as someone who's been in Michigan for almost 4 years at this point, I think the thing that surprised me the most is There's no shortage of people trying to do good. However, when you put all of these things together, we are worse off than we've been. And that really begs the question, what do you do now?
I will resist the temptation to challenge you on saying, for somebody who's been here for 4 years, you made it sound like it's been this such long time, right? I mean, as a 23-year new native of Michigan, that's nothing. Drop in the bucket. Anyway.
Totally. I mean, like for decades we're in this position. I mean, I've been here for 4 years. Yes,
that's exactly what I was thinking. But so you'd say it's just this overall trend is what we're maybe most concerned about. Is that a fair
I think
way
so.
to summarize that?
I mean, you look at the NAEP scores, which is our national rankings. You look at the MSTEP scores, which is our state scores. You look at the concern about teacher shortages, recruitment and retention. You look at the fact that nearly 28% of students are chronically absent. We're not the only state with that concern, but it's years after the pandemic and we're here.
Sure. Mike, what about you?
I can go back a little more than 4 years. I've been following Michigan education as a reporter going back to 1994 when I worked in Toledo and we covered 3 counties in the southern Michigan. What has struck me, and it's the same thing that Isabel talked about, a longer goalpost, wider goalpost, but that we've talked about being mediocre. Our scores are in the middle to the bottom, and we've talked that we need to spend more money. We've talked about we need more choice. We need to get rid of the influence of education unions. None of these things have solved what you would argue would be the problem, right? If you look at the scores that are in front of you on the NAEP scores, in 2023 or 2003, I should say, Michigan was kind of solidly in the middle, right in the middle. I mean, it's slowly gone down, both 4th grade, 8th grade, math, reading. But other places who have tried to arrest where they were or change where they were have seen success. We obviously picked up Mississippi, which has gotten some national buzz for the Mississippi Miracle. But in Michigan, what have we argued about? We want more choice. We have more choice. 25% of the kids go to a charter school or a public school where they don't live. We've said we need more money, and in the last 5 years, and there's been a lot more money spent on K-12. We want more money for early childhood. There's a lot more money for early childhood, but it hasn't moved the needle. We still see the absentees rates so high, and just this last year we had the lowest proficiency scores for 3rd grade reading in the 14 years of the test. That's what surprised me. It just all didn't add up. You would think with all these inputs, the solutions that we sought, more choice, more money, we'd have different outcomes, but we haven't.
And we're going to get deep into the scores here momentarily. For those who may be less familiar, can you unpack the testing that we do here in Michigan and what the 2 different tests are that you mentioned?
Sure. So you've got the MSTEP, which is the state summative assessments. That's being done in your K-8 schools, and that's every school district, public school district. NAEP is a national assessment of educational progress. The way this works is that there's a sample of schools and students in each state that take this test, and then the national governing board looks at those data, and then they rank the scores, and then this test only happens every 2 years. So we just got, in 2025, we got our 2024 scores back.
And what type of material is on those exams?
Yes, so you're looking at math and reading mostly. There's also science and social studies, but we primarily focused on math and reading. When you look at this, there is a little bit of a difference between what the NAEP is and what the MSTEP is, and that is something we encounter with resistance to our reporting, which is that the NAEP has its own set of standards. There's NAEP proficiency, and then there's the MSTEP, which is the state's proficiency. So they're not measuring the exact same thing, but the general idea is, are you proficient at the 4th grade level, at the 8th grade level?
And how do you define proficient? Not you, but how
Yeah.
is proficient defined?
Yeah, Mike, how do they describe it a little bit more?
Which one, MSTEP or NAEP? I don't have the specifics on either. I just know the state has a scale score that it establishes. If you score 1,200 in 3rd grade, then you're considered proficient. And if you're just a little above it, you're still proficient. If you're way above it, you're advanced. But the real intricacies I couldn't give you.
And is that for maybe lack of a better comparison, at grade level?
People generally
Something
say
like
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Well, sorry for the tangent.
No, you're good.
Mike, you mentioned Mississippi, and there certainly has been a lot of talk about the Mississippi Miracle, which saw Mississippi have this incredible transformation in test scores. How does Michigan compare to Mississippi? And what are folks in Michigan saying about Mississippi, whether and it could be good or bad?
Well, I mean, we'll let, Isabel went down there to Mississippi. She can talk about what she saw on the ground. I know in terms of the scores, what they adopted there in terms of how they attacked literacy and reading, the science of reading. It was a K-12 push, really heavy on K-3, a lot of accountability measures. Not everyone was happy about that, but you can see by the results when they start comparing them nationally, they did succeed. They moved these numbers north, and not just a little bit. Now they were 50th and well below Michigan, and now they're 9th in terms of fourth grade math, well above Michigan. But what you hear, I mean, what we have heard come back as, well, Mississippi is teaching, Isabel can talk about, is teaching phonics. They're not teaching reading. Everyone's kind of criticizing some elements of it. Well, they did this and that wasn't a good thing. We couldn't work here. They didn't have unions. Well, they did something. They picked a path and they stuck with it, and they have seen continued success. But I think Isabel should talk about what she saw in Mississippi and maybe how that contrasts with what we see here. And she knows about the legislative battle over the science of reading.
Yeah, so they passed their Literacy-Based Promotion Act in 2013, similarly to Michigan's third grade reading law, similar to Florida's third grade reading law, where if you're way behind the 8 ball in third grade, you're getting held back. They have some differences, though. First of all, there was a lot of intentionality in the K1, 2, and 3. I talked to teachers in the K1, 2, and 3, and they knew about this law. They knew that it was on their backs to make a difference. And when you talk to parents, everyone knows about the third grade gate. They know about this test. But they also invested in teacher training. They used letters for a long time, which is something that Michigan is now using. They now use a different service, but they've been doing this training for a long time. They're trying to incentivize districts to use high quality curriculum, something else Michigan is starting to do. So there's all these different pieces put together. They also invested more in pre-K, and this is like a statewide thing. You can talk to anyone in Mississippi and they know what's going on with this. They have strong opinions about the third grade reading gate. It's not that everyone loves it. It's not that everyone thinks it's a good idea, but they have seen movement with that. So that's some of the things I saw on the ground level. I visited a third grade class in Jackson, did all that stuff.
So you used a phrase there that caught my attention. High quality curriculum, I think is what you said. Is that something specific that Mississippi has invested in? Is it a particular program? Because you said something about Michigan looking to do something similar, or is starting to talk about it anyway.
Yeah, so in Mississippi, the vast majority of their public school districts are using one of 5 different reading curriculums. In Michigan, there was $87 million in the budget this last cycle, and there's now new money in there to let school districts pick from a vetted list of curriculum. So it's similar to Mississippi in that there's a list and you can pick from it. There's no punishment as of right now if you don't pick one of those. And then the way Mississippi made it very clear to me, they're not invested in these curriculums. So it's not like Mississippi is creating their own and then they're getting a kickback for this curriculum. It's not that.
Mike, anything to add about Mississippi or where we are in comparison?
One thing that, and maybe it's the next slide, if you could look at it. Yes, this one. The one thing that struck us was a lot of people say, well, Mississippi, maybe it's just a certain segment of their population that is doing better than Michigan's population. Michigan has a higher minority population. Well, not anywhere close compared to Mississippi. They have a larger group of students that are in poverty. They have a higher percentage of students who are African American. But if you look at the demographics, they're doing better than their poor kids are doing better than our poor kids. They're not poor are doing better than our not poor. Their white kids are doing better than our. I mean, it just goes
across
on and
the board.
on.
It's across the board.
So I think that argument that they're just playing with the numbers, or just they're a different state, you couldn't work here. They're succeeding with every demographic, and that startled me. That I thought, well, maybe there would be a difference. Maybe a lot of times people will compare Michigan. We should be as good as Minnesota. Well, Minnesota's a tough comparison because they have a very small minority population. They don't have anywhere near the poverty we do. But Mississippi, it's the reverse in that case, right? The things that would keep numbers down are not keeping their numbers down. So that's the thing that surprised me, and I think kind of gives a little bit more weight that what they did worked, because one thing that I thought was interesting, they started this in 2013. Here we are 12 years later. They're sticking with it. How many times have we changed between, Snyder, Granholm, Whitmer administrations and, all the different iterations of lawmakers and the state school superintendent? How many times have we changed, right? They picked a plan and they stuck with it. Not everyone was happy, but there was some continuity.
So on that, right, is there political will that is needed to have that stick-to-itiveness? Is that something that, I'm not sure if that came up in your visit to Mississippi, Isabel, but it seems like there would need to be some kind of will to be able to say, no, we're not going to just, chase the next thing.
Yeah, I think if you ask the audience, they would all say there needs to be some continuity. But yeah, I mean, we had a virtual event about a month ago, and we had Marguerite Rosa, who she studies education, governance, and finance all across the country, and she talked about like needing to stick to a plan, having a bully pulpit, and saying this is the message. And in Michigan, we just don't really have that right now.
So you mentioned a couple things, but pointedly, is Michigan taking any lessons from Mississippi?
Yes. First of all, we spoke with, he's now the former state superintendent, but at the time, the state superintendent, Michael Rice, he said he talks to Carrie Wright, who Mike interviewed last week. She's the former Mississippi state superintendent. Some of the things Michigan is doing is informed by what Mississippi is doing. Absolutely. But we're doing it later than them.
So when might we see, how long did it take Mississippi to see the results?
Well, I mean, Carrie Wright talked about it that it was 3 years before they started seeing incremental results. And I was a little surprised that you could see people irritated if, there's 12,000 third graders that are held back and the next year it's 10,000. It's a small state. It's less than half the population of Michigan, but they stuck with it. But what she said was as soon as they started seeing the incremental gains, one, they publicized it, let everyone know, and then they just kept coming. So it just started informing. The dropout rate went down, the graduation rate went up. It was all the test scores. So I think people pretty quickly saw, and policymakers, because a parent, you only know one kid or two kids, depending on how many you had, saw that it was succeeding. So that gave it its own impetus to continue going. In Michigan, the third grade reading law, did we have a chance to see it work or not work? No, we had COVID. We had we had a little bit of a hiccup there, and then it was jettisoned, and there were problems with it. But that was one piece of, that was one attempt at a solution, and we never did see the incremental change. Did we see any incremental change? No, proficiency reading and proficiency scores in third grade have gone down almost every year for the last 5, or 3.
Was and this one just popped into my head, the political environment in Mississippi, different than here, for sure, right?
For sure.
But was it a partisan issue to get their changes implemented?
So they had a Republican-controlled legislature and a governor. There was tension about what the reform exactly looked like. They do have a teachers union, but it doesn't have the type of bargaining rights that in Michigan we have. So there was opposition to this for sure, but they were able to get it passed in a way that we haven't seen here.
And has it become more, has support for it gone way up given the results that they're seeing?
It's interesting. When I talked to superintendents there and teachers, there was still that hesitation of like, I don't like the idea of holding kids back. There's still that. But there is that also that sense of pride of like, we've really ratcheted up on these rankings.
Yeah. One thing that we've seen in Michigan for several years is a declining number of high school graduates. We at Oakland University and every other higher ed place around the state feels this in a downstream impact, right? Where there's just fewer kids available to attract to our institution. I'm curious if there have been upstream effects with fewer students that are graduating. There are fewer kids in high school, right? So do we see smaller class sizes? Are we seeing more money get into the classroom?
Yeah, Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about what you found out with funding?
Well, one thing that's fast. Yeah, this is the graphic. Full credit to the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. which pointed this out to me, and then you look at it. So the black line that is moving up is the percentage gain in the number of staff people in K-12 schools. So that includes teachers, administrators, and aides. And ever since 2015-16, except for the year of COVID, which is explainable because a lot of people lost jobs temporarily, it's just gone up. It's gone up 14% since that time. So, but at the same time, the number of students in Michigan in K-12 has gone down. That's the demographic decline that you pointed out. The birth rate is been going down for a number of years. So that's fewer kids who are age 18 because of what happened 18 years ago, or what didn't happen 18 years ago, I should say. So at the same time, even class sizes are going down. Funding is going up. But what is the surprise when you see this, you'd think that there would be better outcomes, that you're getting more attention to the students, you're getting more not just administrators, more aides. I mean, there were some school districts during COVID that added hundreds of aides to kind of address some of the problems that were downstream of COVID, the lack of in-person learning. And again, it also didn't arrest where we're going in terms of scores. When I saw this chart, I would have thought that the reverse had occurred. That the reason we added the staff was it worked, and we're going to add more staff because it's going to keep working, and it has not.
Anything to add, Isabel?
One thing I would say too is when we talk to districts about this trend, one of the things that did come up is we would love to hire a high quality credentialed teacher, but there aren't enough teachers. So what we can do is hire some parapros. So I think there is some tension of that as well. But what do you do about that?
Right. And when we say staff, right, so that's a catch-all category.
Correct.
So is there one type of staff member that's increasing more than others? Because if it is teachers, well, that's probably a good thing, right?
Yeah, teachers are increasing. They're up a couple percentage points. And again, if you couple that with the drop in enrollment, you can see why class sizes would be fewer kids per student. But the biggest increase is the parapros that Isabel mentioned. I mean, there was, I think it's 26,000 additional aides, instructional and non-instructional, in the schools. It is a large number, and it's substantial. There are more administrators. I mean, which makes sense if you've got more people to manage. But again, it's not. The results aren't. And some districts are showing gains. I mean, we did a whole series on outliers, districts that are bucking the trend. So I don't want to label this as every district in every part of the state is declined, but the results writ large aren't matching these increases.
Of course, there are always exceptions to the rule, right?
Sure.
And I wonder if are there some commonalities in those exceptions, those outliers that other districts or the state could look to say, hey, look, they tried something different and it has had an effect.
Sure. I mean, one thing to point out, Detroit is still way below the state average, but Detroit actually increased in a lot of its MSTEP over last year, which I think is interesting compared to the statewide level. When you look at districts that we focused on, we called them trend buckers. We did that with Redford Union. We did this they were doing letters training. There was Ferndale in the mix. There were several school districts that were doing something where they were basically saying, everyone's going to get trained in this. We're going to give teachers support to do it, and then we're going to do it out. There was also a lot of humble superintendents who said, we're not doing anything different, but they are. They're doing really intentional professional development, and they're saying, we're going to train our teachers and we're going to follow that trend.
So we've danced around it a little bit here in the time we've spent. Funding, right? It seems like, well, it always comes down to resources, right? I mean, that's in everything. But that's always sort of the headliner, right? So what's the story on funding in schools over the last, couple decades?
Well, this is one of the areas where we got a lot of pushback after our story ran. And because I think we picked the beginning point of 2014 or 2015. And if you look over that time frame, adjusted for inflation, Michigan had the 9th largest increase in the nation. There were real increases in funding. A lot of it was during COVID, but some of it was before. And obviously the COVID spending has subsided to an extent. But people criticized this because they said we didn't go back far enough in time. And they wanted to go back, some of them wanted to go back to Prop A when that went into effect in 1994, and that we've been underfunding schools, for decades. And that's why there's an effort, to get something on the ballot to increase taxes currently. But if you, depending on what your frame is, you can say either funding is down or funding is up. There's a slide. Can you go one or this one right here? You got it. If there were some years, and I think it's 2004 through 2009, 2010, we were coming out of a really bad recession. Well, we were actually in a recession that the rest of the country joined us in 2008, unfortunately. And actual funding was down, and it was way down if we had kept up with inflation. And that is the chart on the left. But then, if you begin in 2015, the increases were on par for what you would expect for inflation. And then in the COVID years, it went up substantially. So there has been money. And I think someone's here from the Mack Center would point out you've had a lot of time to adjust those cuts 15 years ago. You can't continue to blame them. And I don't know, there's administrators here who will probably argue that point very stringently. But it's not like other states went through these recessions. Other states cut funding. Michigan increased a lot of its funding. A substantial portion did go towards retirement and pensions, which has been pointed out. But a lot of it did also go to the classroom. You can't increase staff 14% over the last 12 years and not increase funding. I mean, these people didn't all take pay cuts to come work for the greater good of the K-12 school system. So funding into the people who argue that it's just not enough. I mean, obviously, it's probably never not enough. Teachers should all make $120,000 here. I don't know. We get a lot of great teachers that way. But the funding is not as dire as some people think. In fact, it is higher as it was 2015.
Again, this is, we're talking broad brushstrokes here, and so can you speak to how funding is different in different districts, right? Because it's not everybody is working with the same amount at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's different in Rochester than it is in Birmingham, than it is in Southfield, than it is in Pontiac, than it is in Detroit, than it is in Grand Rapids, right? I mean, so what kind of landscape is there for funding in different districts?
Sure. So, I mean, across the state, everyone's getting about $10,050 per student. That's across the state. But then you have some districts who are able to raise extra funds to pay for to pay for school capital costs, et cetera, special education. Then you also have some districts who are receiving a lot more money from the federal government because of the population of economically disadvantaged students you have. And then you have some of the smaller things, right? You have the PTAs, the PTOs, the parent organizations that are helping fund extra stuff like the playground, so then you don't have to pull from your general fund. You've got all that. And then you've got savings accounts. You've got some districts that have really healthy fund balances where they can pull from their savings accounts on a downturn year. And then you have districts who are really riding that 5% margin where they don't have a lot of room.
It is always interesting to think about it in the broad brushstrokes, right? But you really have to drill down to see specific examples, right? I mean, that's the... And that's just to say that, we're covering things in this little discussion that are, maybe meant for folks to go and dig into their own community and see what it's like. And one area where a lot of folks really felt what it was like was the COVID era, right? So, and we hear all the time about, there's a COVID hangover, there's lingering effects, right? What about COVID did you discover in your reporting that might be a major takeaway for folks who are tuning in?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see that with absenteeism for sure. School leaders I talked to all across the state for our series on absenteeism, they said that there's still a little bit of that hangover where it's now okay to miss more school, or how sick is too sick to come to school. When you have the CDC saying you should stay home for 10 days to isolate, what does that come back if you miss a day or two here to go to Disney or whatever the case is? So I think we're still seeing the effects of COVID on absenteeism, and maybe it's not, these kids are getting really sick. It's the culture shift that comes with that.
Yeah, that was the thing that came back to me when I went up to Alpena, which is, pretty homogeneous part of the state. It's not the wealthiest part of the state at all, and they're just struggling with it still. And so, like, I went and talked to a first grade teacher, and in 2018, it's not a small district. It's the entire county. In 2018, 7% of the kids were chronically absent, which means they missed 18 days or more. Okay, that's 1 in 12 kids. Help me with the math here. 1 in 13. Last year it was over 20%. So 1 in 5 kids are missing 18 days. Now, what does that mean in reality? It means you have a class that the teacher looks out, and if more than 5 of her 20 kids aren't there that day, she kind of has to hit the pause button, and we're not going to move forward to the next lesson. Well, that's the building block year for reading for the 2nd and 3rd grade. That's just one example. And when I talk to people in that district, and in other districts in that region, it was parents. It's not. There are real financial burdens. They have transportation issues. They have work issues. They have all sorts of issues. But a lot of them, it's just there's the attitude towards school just had changed a little bit. I talked to another superintendent in that region, and he said that there was a resistance to the idea that the government, and in this case the schools, expects their child to be in class. And I'm like, really? A lot of us of our age can't remember. I know I didn't miss 18 days in all my 13 years, and 7 of those were my senior year. But yeah, there's just
senioritis there.
No, I had mono my first
even
week.
Worse.
Yeah, I had my first week of school. So there's just this attitude shift, but when we look at this, it's happened in every state, right? So a colleague of ours, Ron French, who worked on the story quite a bit, he went to Indiana. Yes, they had the same spike that Michigan had, but they've brought it back down much faster, and they're much lower than Michigan is now. And so there are some questions that still are unanswered as to why is Michigan this outlier. It's not an outlier. There are a handful of states that still have exceedingly high chronic absenteeism rates. Why isn't it lower? I don't know what the answer to that is or what the solution is, but it is a real, I think, downstream effect of COVID, that there was this disconnection with the importance of being at the school.
So, we've talked about money, we've talked about test scores. So this absenteeism, what impact does that have on the test scores that we see throughout the state?
Yeah, so when we talked to teachers, they talked about how their kids who are routinely gone were having harder time in school. You would imagine that that's going to transfer over to their absenteeism scores. We also know generally that when you look at national statistics, absenteeism absolutely affects student outcomes. So there's a correlation there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Alpena, the example that I brought up going up there, their 3rd grade proficiency scores, which were in the middle of the pack in terms of the state, had just declined the last 5 years, just tick, 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 tick down. And again, obviously it's not the numbers. It's not like out of 10,000 kids, but there are real declines and they're measurable, and they do attribute a portion of that to chronic absenteeism, which makes complete sense. You can't learn if you're not, as so many people have told us, you can't learn if you're not in the chair.
Now, we have talked about a number of things. We've talked about them in broad brushstrokes, and I don't want us to be overly negative if that's not where we should be, because there are some folks in this room, but many, many more all across the state who are incredibly dedicated, work tirelessly to create a learning environment where kids can thrive. And I think that's where we often, I think, and here's a little moderator's prerogative, right? I think we often forget, or we can, that we all want the same thing, right? We all want our kids to get the best education they possibly can. Is there reason for optimism? Why should we be optimistic about where we're headed?
Absolutely. I think there's plenty of reason for optimism. And this is just to clarify, we talked to tens and tens and hundreds of people for this overall series in the last 6 months. But we understand that there are people doing hard work in schools every single day, and it's a hard job, and we understand that. So reasons for optimism, few things that come to mind for me. One, I think school districts are taking seriously this idea of like, what does it take to get students to read on grade level? It's not just phonics, it's also comprehension, it's also understanding the text in front of you. I think that's one area of optimism. Two, depending how you feel about politics, I think it's interesting that so many political leaders are thinking about education, and I'm hoping they're looking to sources and looking to experts to figure out what's going to work. I think that's also a galvanizing moment. And three, I think there's a real moment for, we are past COVID, what can we do now? There is this sort of energy when I talk to people where people do want to figure out what's going on. People who are on completely different sides of the aisle who feel this need to like do something about it. And you can see that in our emails. We get a ton of emails from readers who are like, what is going on? How can we make a difference? What can we do? Or I have this idea. So I think there's a real movement across Michigan right now to say, we need to do something, let's move in a direction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, you know, there was one of the candidates for governor, their first position, you know, they went up to Mackinac, the Mayor Duggan, and made education his central issue. And I was, I was kind of shocked. I mean, everyone knows, I mean, the governor apparently seems to have little control over it because there's a appointed superintendent by an elected State Board of Education. And I challenge most people, name one member of that State Board of Education, right? I mean, it's not, I mean, it's not cohesive. And for that person to make it an issue, and then subsequent candidates for governor have made it an issue. So, you know, they're on the clock, I guess. Whoever wins, you know, they're going to make it a focus. Let's see.
Mike, Isabel, thank you very much. You have laid a foundation for what we'll talk about in our next session with experts from across the state and with varied and different perspectives on all of these issues that you've covered in your reporting. So thank you for being here. And we're going to take just a short break, rearrange ourselves, and we'll be back in a few minutes with our second session to react to what Isabel and Mike have talked about this morning. So hold tight. We'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.